You're listening to Qualified with Kate.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the second episode of Qualified with Kate. I'm Kate. I'm here with Lucas. Lucas, how are you doing?
I'm good. It's almost Christmas, so can't complain. How are you doing?
I am good. It's finally actually cooled down in Houston, so it's been like 80 degrees all week, and that has not had me in the Christmas spirit. So,
Well, it
but
was
today was like 50.
okay. I just got back from walking Nala, and it was 38 degrees out here. But I'm gonna fly home in a couple of days, see some family, and be home for Christmas. So, looking forward to that too.
Get California sunshine. Yeah,
We
I
need
was
it.
hoping, I'm hoping for like the Christmas miracle of snow, but I think it's actually going to be 80 degrees on Christmas Day here. So I kind of teased this episode last week. This week we interviewed Dylan Stewart, who was formerly for the past 4 years running social media for Formula One. Dylan is absolutely brilliant. Lucas had to edit several pauses out of this episode where I just like was sitting there in awe of what he was saying. I went into this episode, I told Dylan before we started recording, that I was thinking about changing the name. And by the time that I had gotten done recording this episode, I knew that I wanted to change the name. Just so you guys are aware, Dylan and I recorded this episode back in September. So it is a couple months old. So some things seem a little out of date. That explains it. But I think you'll learn a lot from it. Lucas is not a Formula One fan, so I'm going to catch you all up on what happened last weekend. So Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton went into the final race this season exactly tied. And Formula One marketed it as we're at an even slate. This is the race that decides everything. Lewis qualified on pole, Max second. There was kind of a controversial move in the first lap where Max ran Lewis off the track, and then people were saying Max should have had to give the spot back, but I disagree. I thought the stewards actually made the right call in that one, that Lewis didn't really gain an advantage by running that wide. He didn't overtake off the track. He was ahead. And with 6 laps to go, Nicholas Latifi hit the wall. So we got a safety car. Lewis Hamilton's ahead by like a solid 11 seconds at this point. They pit Max, put brand new tires on him. The stewards say that they are not going to allow lap cars to unlap themselves. So under a safety car, cars that are lapped can usually unlap themselves. So like in this case, there were 4 cars between Max and Lewis because Lewis had already lapped these cars and Max had not. Then with 2 laps to go, all of a sudden, Michael Massey, who was trending on Twitter for days, decided just the 4 cars between Max and Lewis could go, not the 2 lap cars between Max and Carlos Sainz, who was in third. So very controversial. Max is on new tires. Lewis is on 40 lap old hards. Max overtakes him and wins the World Driver Championship, and it has been a very, very controversial decision. So there's talk that Lewis Hamilton might retire. Mercedes challenged it, but withdrew their appeal. It has just been, if you listen to the drivers' radios at the end of the race, it's a mess. But I was telling Lucas, in the 4 days after the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, there were 900 million impressions for Formula One on Twitter.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's definitely not how you want a back and forth that's gone on all year like that. That's so close to be decided. I think that goes for any sport, right? If you have 2 teams that are very evenly matched, like you want it to be an outright win. You don't want it to be like a technicality or anything like that. But how did you feel with the decision?
I was pretty frustrated. I was actually standing on my couch screaming like, no, no, no. I just couldn't believe it happened. Like you said, and I feel that Max drove well enough this year to be a world driver champion. I feel Lewis drove well enough this year to be a world driver champion. But when you market it to come down as a winner take all race and then the FIA steps in and basically decides the winner, have an issue with that, So it just, yeah, it feels dirty. And honestly, I feel bad for everyone involved. Like, I feel like there are no winners. Like, obviously, Lewis is devastated. He dominated that race. I felt like Lewis was going to win his 8th World Driver Championship, and there wasn't a question about it. And now I feel like Max has half of F1 fans looking at that win like it has an asterisk next to it. So everyone loses, which really, really sucks. Michael Massey said that he wanted it to come down to a race, which I understand. He did not want it to be decided under a safety car. The easiest way to do that is red flag the race. But conversation for a different time. Let's listen to Dylan in all his brilliance. I promise you, if you are trying to grow a following on social media, if you want to understand anything about marketing in general, Dylan's just absolutely brilliant. So I think you guys will enjoy. Hi, Dylan. How are you?
Very well, Kate. How about yourself?
I'm really good. Thanks for asking. Thanks for coming on this morning.
My pleasure.
So for those of you listening that don't know, Dylan has been the social media coordinator for Formula One. Was that your title?
Correct, yes.
For the past 3 years?
4 years.
4 years. And now you're headed off on a new venture, which we'll talk about a little later. But I want to start all the way from the beginning. So you were obviously born in the UK.
Yes. So born in the UK, grew up between here and Switzerland, and then went over to the US for university. So that's where I kind of picked up my love for, or actually not even love, I just figured out that I wanted to be in sport media. And that's kind of what led me to go join Formula One once I graduated.
Okay. And I already told you this beforehand that I was going to give you shit for picking Duke of all schools. We talked about how I feel like Duke, North Carolina is just a rivalry that you have to pick a side. And I have chosen UNC. Was coming
you chose
over
poorly,
here,
but you chose.
I chose baby blue for life. Was coming to the United States kind of like a culture shock as far as like college athletics go?
Oh, huge. I mean, if you compared athletes in Europe to college athletes in America, you would have thought that each athlete in America is $1 million baby, because the way you treat them, pamper them, is unbelievable. From the food to the facilities, it's absolutely unparalleled. It works because you guys can generate a huge amount of money from these college athletes, where in Europe we just don't. You have either professional sports or you have amateur sport. There's no in between. And even at the professional level, I don't know if you've ever had a chance to look around Premier League football teams, stadiums, or Real Madrid Stadium, for example, one of the most famous stadiums in the world. Their locker rooms are nothing in comparison to a college football team's locker room or a basketball team's locker room. I mean, these guys have sofas, TVs, popcorn stations. They're kings. Whereas you go to the old school stuff and you start to see, all right, they're not selling you on the comfort and the luxury, they're selling you on the history, which I guess Europe fortunately has a lot more of.
Right. Yeah. That is something that I think is undervalued here. Like, even when you just look at the buildings, for me, it's one of the reasons I'm really I really love Montreal and Quebec as a city, just because I feel like it's the one place in North America where you really get that taste of like the old European feel. It doesn't feel so new, but it is insane. Like, if you look at football facilities here, like my sister is at Texas Tech. She works for Texas Tech, and my cousin played football here. And I remember we walked through the locker room last year, and they're in the process of completely renovating it. And there was nothing wrong with it, but it's just what you have to do to recruit kids to come play for you these days. There's such an expectation. Like, colleges are hiring graphic designers solely to make graphics to promote these kids on social media.
Social media, again, we'll talk more about it, but it becomes more and more important every single day. It's
Right.
everyone's looking at trends. What's the trend? The trend is that it's more and more valuable because everyone spends so much time on their mobile phones. I mean, now television isn't just competing with other TV series. They're competing with what's on a mobile phone, because if you haven't gripped your audience throughout the whole entire show, film, whatever it might be, then they're kind of not paying attention. They're on their phones, or on Instagram, on TikTok. They're WhatsApping their friends. I mean, they're not on Facebook. Let's be realistic. But yeah, it's a very, very competitive market. The market for people's attention.
But you didn't study uh, sports marketing in college. You studied political science, right?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
So I studied political science with the idea that I had no idea what I wanted to do once I graduated. And I figured that, look, I'm not a mathematician. I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to be a lawyer. I'm not going to go in finance. So I need to make sure that when I'm sat at the dinner table, I've got something I can offer value to, because half the jobs you're going to get in the world are going to be through your own network, through a great conversation you had with somebody and they thought, yeah, I'm going to give this guy a shot. So political science, I mean, everyone loves to talk about politics, and I mean, the US especially, not even every 4 years, it's constant. It's you're
constant.
Either, and you learn, all right, how do you give the answers to both the right and the left? How do you explain, this is why I think this might be happening, and here's my prediction? And they go, oh, wow, you really think so? You throw out a few outlandish claims that you might genuinely think could happen. And one of my things I thought actually this genuinely could happen was Trump getting elected back for his first term, when he announced his candidacy as in the primaries. My philosophy there is, whoever gets the most coverage in the media is the one who's going to be the winner, because you're not dealing with educated voters from top to bottom. It's en masse people who recognize a name and have some sort of very light bit of information about who they're actually going to go for. And if you recognize the name and you think, all right, that's what I'm going to go for, and that's what happens.
Yeah, 2016 was a very interesting political cycle for us here, just because I mean, I've done a lot of research on it as well. I was just genuinely curious how it came to be. That makes a lot of sense. But one of the other things that it's been said is that, people in rural America really focus on, like, a town is built around one factory, right? And if they lose that factory because it gets outsourced, then that town sort of becomes a ghost town. So the promise of bringing America back to a former time, while those of us who have lived in big cities are like, why would we want to go backwards? People who live in rural America, who have completely lost their, quality of life, their normalcy of life, yearn for that. So just an all around interesting evaluation of the psyche of the country.
Oh yeah, we're not going to have the answer here, and no one will ever, I expect, have the answer, because it's so complex. But media does, in my eyes, play such a huge role. That's why they spend so much money on advertising. There's no one in the world spends as much money as on a candidacy as the US presidents.
Also true. I've been curious to see if that will continue to trend downward as, like, social media becomes more and more prevalent and you have access to, like, more and more free resources to spread your word. But I guess I never thought, that's a really interesting concept for studying political science before pivoting to going into social media. So did you do any, like, sports marketing, social media work at Duke while you were studying political science?
So my avenue into figuring out I wanted to go into media, especially in Formula One, was I had a professor, Jed Simmons, who he was instrumental in at Turner Networks, bringing in the Powerpuff Girls and Johnny Bravo, if you know those names.
Yes.
And he then later on became the head of content for YouTube. But we connected through motorsports and his love for Formula One. And he ended up saying, look, come take my class, but there's a catch. It's not here at Duke, it's over at UNC. And so I went over to UNC a couple times a week to go take his class. And it was the best class I ever took in my whole college experience. It was covering the whole media world. It was just a brain dump from all his years of experience. It felt like a business school class. And we would just cover case studies. He'd bring in these fantastic speakers. And I was completely hooked. So I saw that there was an opportunity with Formula One arising. And Formula One was just getting bought by Liberty Media, who, an American-based company. They own the Atlanta Braves, they own SiriusXM. So they were obviously going to be investing heavily in the digital world of Formula One, because it just really hadn't been touched before I arrived. So I said, I made sure that I got that job. I managed to just hustle, get my CV into the right hands and say, look, I'm a young guy. I haven't got any kind of concrete social media experience, but I understand it. Here's my plan. Here's a bit of a roadmap of what I'd like to do with your channels. And please hire me. I'm cheap.
I'm
so, cheap. Yeah. So fortunately enough, I got the position, and we really didn't have much of a following at all. We had no YouTube channel. We had, I think maybe 1 million followers on Twitter. Our Instagram was, I think, just under 2.8 million as I joined, which then has been brought up to 15 or 16 million since. We had no TikTok platform because obviously TikTok didn't exist. And
right.
So we always, it was the approach where we got to say, look, we're a startup. We're literally doing this from the ground up, but you've got a lot of funding, and you've got a very sexy product. So sell that as well as you can, and let's see what happens.
So I'm going to sound like a very stereotypical American here, but how important was it to break into the US market? Because there's just so much money here, especially in sports. We just talked about it in college sports. When you get to the pro level, it's astronomical.
Yeah. So every sport in the world wants to crack the American market. But if you have the choice of, do you want to crack the American market or do you want to crack the global market? As in, I say global, meaning the rest of the world, excluding the US, you would always go for the latter, because it is just bigger, the rest of the world. And Formula One is, again, it's more well-known, it's more watched than the NFL, the NBA, and it's a sort of event that someone says to a global executive or a president of a country or someone who's almost untouchable because they're so busy and that they just want to get a couple minutes of their time. If they say, look, come to a Formula One race, and okay, yeah, I'll come to the Italian Grand Prix or I'll come to Monaco, and which you can't really do as much as well in America. You've got so many sports games going on at any given time. I mean, you said that we talked about, you've got college and then you've got pro level, and between baseball, basketball, football, hockey, you're struggling. I mean, even MLS is now pushing and getting bigger. You're struggling to say, okay, where should I be spending my attention? And to have a legitimate answer to that, unless you're a hardcore fan, it's incredibly hard. So back to the question of trying to crack the American market, F1 would love to crack the American markets. There's a lot of money to be made there, but the way it's going to make sense for the sport to do it is by acting as a niche rather than in competition with the NFL or the NBA, because we're not going to be racing there year round. Like, let's say we get to a stage where we're racing 3 times in America. That's quite a lot of races for one single country. I think the most we've ever had is 2 races in one country over any given season. So for it to go to 3 suddenly, and that wouldn't even include the races in Canada and the race in Mexico City, so which are never too far away from most Americans.
Right.
So I think we'll be, yeah, it'd be a nice thing to crack, but it's a small mountain to climb.
I feel like you're on your way because so my friends and I like to get together on Sunday mornings and we do breakfast for the races. So we'll make breakfast from whatever country they're racing in that week, which has actually been super fun and just kind of feels like a good way to, I don't know, try something new and also not suffer waking up at 7 a.m. on a Sunday. But I do think that's where Formula One is like really fortunate is that yes, it's competing with the attention of like every American sport. And obviously there's just tons and tons here, but it's not competing time wise. We don't have games happening at 8 a.m. on Sundays when Grand Prix are going on. So
yeah, it's a fair point. It's, well, I mean, probably the perspective that Formula One takes is that we're not on at a good time for Americans because, like you said, who wants to get up 7 a.m. on a Sunday morning? And rather than like, I'll just I'll take a look at the result when I wake up, or I'll watch the highlights afterwards. So it's a tough one to, you're right, I quite like your perspective on that actually, that we're not competing with other big sports at the same time.
yeah, it's actually super. I mean, it's great for me because I watch baseball all the time and it's awful when, it's nice when people are at home, you're used to watching, like, I'm a big Tampa Bay Rays fan, so they're on the East Coast, and then best friend works for the Giants, so I like to watch the Giants games. So it's like normally one's ending as the other one's beginning, but when they're playing in the same time zone, I'm just flipping back and forth and miserable. So it's really nice for it not to compete with any. I will say it is particularly brutal because I'm so interested in data and analytics to have to get up at 4:30 to watch a free practice session. But I want to see the aero rakes. I need to know what's happening.
You're an addict. That's, you like that.
It's very helpful. I think that's what draws me to Formula One is just like, for me, as much data as I take and try and turn it into performance, to see that at an even higher level and they're taking in so much data and they're converting it so quickly. It's just the strategy is like really fun for me. And then of course the speed's just absolutely exhilarating. When you were working on your plan for social media for Formula One, was it most important to you at the time to like really make a presence on YouTube, to grow the Instagram, or like what strategy did you initially think was going to be the most effective?
Well, because it wasn't so much a strategy of picking one niche and running with it. I mean, I say we hardly had anything on our platforms. We didn't have video on Instagram at first. So we only used to post pictures. So imagine how many likes and views and engagements you're leaving on the table. So it was a case of, okay, how do we now get all that content that we want there onto the platform efficiently? Because you've got to put in certain workflows that make sense for the organization. Because, I mean, you're not suddenly saying, okay, we've got 50 video editors and 20 producers, as well as an infinite number of presenters. We have restrictions still. The ultimate strategy was, okay, how do we optimize this whole program while starting from the ground up? It's like, how do you build Vice Media from the start? That's kind of the questions we were asking ourselves.
So did you enjoy coming in and being able to like essentially build something from the ground up instead of stepping in and kind of continuing someone else's work?
Oh yeah. It's not often you can do something and leave your mark at a big organization like Formula One. It's, if someone says, oh, I'm going to go join the NFL and part of their business development team, if you can leave after 4 years and say, oh, look at this and that, and people compliment your work without even really knowing you had a part in it, it's quite a, first of all, a good feeling, and it's a good sign that you've done something that was worthwhile and actually made a difference. So yeah, I mean, I was very happy to join a team where you were like, all right, we're properly building here. We're not just extending outwards, or just refining someone else's vision. It's no, this is how I see it. I see its potential. Let's get as close to that as possible. And we start now.
And it's wild to be thinking that you're saying that on a sport and an organization that's been around for 60 years,
71 years. It's
71 years.
71 years because we had our F1 70, so 7 years of Formula One in 2020. So first Formula One Grand Prix was 1950, Silverstone.
Okay.
So it's been a wee while.
And is it something that's like really special to you to know that you kind of have your thumbprint on F1's branding?
Oh yeah, I've got a lot of family in Formula One, and they've definitely left their thumbprints. So yeah, I'm not quite sure I'm going to stack my own thumbprints up against theirs, but I've got a bit more time left on my clock. So I'll be, I'm not going to be leaving the sport for good. I'm going to still kind of hanging around the paddock, doing little bits of work here and there, and hopefully being able to add value to the sport that I grew up loving.
That's really special. Yeah. Especially to be able to make a difference off the track instead of just on the track.
Exactly. It's because, I mean, if you're not a driver, you're not going to have much hope making a difference on track.
Very fair. Very fair. And there are very limited spots for those.
Yes.
What would you say was the most important or underrated skill that you would tell someone who's trying to aspire to a career in sports social media?
Good question. I think different people have different strengths. So if you're someone who's more of a creative, then don't go with what you think is the vision of what it just should be like. I mean, take inspiration from everywhere else around the world and then add your own flair on it. Because first of all, it's tried and tested models. You can see exactly what's ringing bells. And if you ever heard the phrase, there's no such thing as a new invention, just a reinvention of an old idea.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing on social media. You're always looking at how can we be influenced, or how can we take inspiration from what someone else has done and combine that with another idea of something that someone else has done, and then on top of that add a Formula One flair onto it and say that this is now a brand new unique format to Formula One or a motorsport. So taking memes as an example, I remember pushing to do memes in Formula One for the very first time from the official @F1 account, and there was a lot of question marks over, oh, should we really be doing this? Is this making us too jokey? Is this, and you have to justify these things because it's not your personal account. It's a very corporate account that a lot of big brands put money into. So you've got to show that this is a really considered viewpoint, and we should be doing this because of X, Y, Z reasons. Now, yeah, that's kind of the perspective for a creative. If you're someone who's more data focused and you say that, look, I haven't quite got the eye that someone else has got, but I can figure out trends. I can see what's happening. I can pick up on how to optimize workflows, because that's a huge thing in social media. Unless you're deciding that I'm just going to burn the candle at both ends for 24/7, 365, then you've really got to find a way that makes sense to achieve your goals, or to achieve the goals of the brands. So learn about workflow, learn about logistics in an organization, and keep on following accounts and talking with people on social media, because it is the new LinkedIn. It's so easy, fast. Like, I find people who I'm working with now through Instagram, not through a HR company or a headhunting company. Finding people who put out great pieces of creative on their own personal platforms and to market themselves. That's what I'm now going to be doing on my own personal platform, is shouting about some of the cool ideas that I've been working on. I genuinely think people will like, regardless if they're a friend or a family member. It's just someone who's going to go land on my page and say, wow, this guy's got it, or he understands what you want to see on social media.
I like that. That's very good advice. My other question for you is, how difficult was it when you stepped into the role of the Formula One role, of realizing that not only did you have to market to the purist of the sports, the people who have been fans for forever, and also try and relate with a younger fan base that's coming in? You saying the meme thing made me think of that. It's obviously a way to draw in, people. I think you see Formula One memes everywhere now, or at least I do. And we send them in our group messages all the time because they're funny and they're quick and usually they're pretty clever. How hard is it to have to entertain a fan base that spans 50 or 60 years age-wise?
It's tough. There's no silver bullet where you can say, oh, you just do this and just let the over 45 see these posts and the under 45 see these posts. There's an understanding that if you're following the Formula One social media accounts, that there's a organic interest in Formula One. So some platforms are more focused around the hardcore fans and some are focused more around the general fans. So I'd call Twitter the home for the more hardcore. Facebook, pretty similar to that as well. It's an older demographic. And then when you go to YouTube and Instagram, considerably younger. And then lastly, TikTok. I'm not sure I know any 35-year-old pluses who are on TikTok. Or at least they don't admit it. Or they've said, right, oh, I'm just on there because my kids are looking at this stuff. So they're all coming up with excuses. So things on TikTok, we put out with the idea that it's for the youngest of the young fans. And we're speaking the language of the platform rather than trying to force a message down someone's throats. But when you do get to places where Instagram is probably the biggest overlap, because it's the biggest platform of all, and you can't delineate age and who sees what. So you just put out content on the basis that if you're following F1, we've given it to you in a really simplified format that's bright, colorful, engaging, looks cool, very important. You cannot put out graphics that are dull, boring, and just don't sell themselves. So yeah, I'm sorry, I'm waffling around because I don't really have a silver bullet. Basically, we just made sure that there was, bottom line, good content on the platform. That's how you get around it.
Very fair. Was TikTok coming about and making this huge surge that it did, especially obviously during the pandemic, was that kind of reinvigorating for you as like a new creative outlet? Because I feel like when you're in social media, even though things are happening and things are constantly evolving, that it's still ultimately at the end of the day more of the same.
Yeah, it's so weirdly enough, I was pushing for TikTok on Formula One as a Formula One account for a while, but this is where you kind of get a bit of insight once you work in the sport for a while. Rights restrictions are a big issue. So Formula One cannot start posting content onto a platform without knowing that the IP that we're posting there is securely and legally ours, and no one else can commercialize it other than ourselves. So that right there is a very big blocker to a snap decision. So I wanted to go and say, let's get involved, let's go. It took a long time to get that one over the line. But once we did, then we could get a lot more creative. So currently, if you go on our TikTok page now, I made a funny little video at the British Grand Prix when we announced the brand new car, we showcased the new car for 2022. And I had a little idea that ended up being the most watched TikTok video for Formula One ever. It's on like 35 million views or so at the moment. And it's just me zooming in on the 2020 car or 2022 car, and with my hands, and I just created a kind of interesting edits around it, just right there on the ground. And yeah, it's you could do that on TikTok, but you can't do that on other platforms. You could probably get away with it on Instagram with an IG reel, but it would look a little bit out of place on on the other platforms.
I actually remember that video. It came up in my feed. Instagram blows my mind, or TikTok blows my mind, because the algorithm is just scary. Like, how it figures out things that you like is terrifying. I mean, awesome, but also terrifying.
Yeah, it's kind of points to the fact that we are very predictable as humans.
I didn't think of it that way, but that's true. I laughed
if you're looking for
oh no, go ahead.
If you're looking for a good book to read, have a look at Dan Ariely's Duke Professor. I'll plug that. His book, Predictably Irrational. It's very basic in terms of the ideas, but it just makes a lot of sense, and it explains why humans act so irrationally. And you think surely they would do something else. Anyway, platforms like TikTok take the learnings, whether they actually read the book or not. I assume probably not, but it's quite a good bit of entertainment while also learning something at the same time.
That you do find tons of useful information on there. I really like to clean. I know that's kind of an odd thing to enjoy, but I am shocked when like new cleaning hacks come up, or I laugh because I actually like Australian Australian rules football, and I don't know how it figured that out. I don't follow any AFL accounts, but I was scrolling through one day and I was like, how did I just get this AFL video? How do you know I'm up at 2 a.m. watching games in Melbourne? It's just mind-blowing.
They know a lot more than you'll ever know. I mean, think about what's publicly available now to be able to find that piece of information on individuals around the world without any private organization charging you anything for it. So now imagine what governments have, and especially if it's a Chinese government that should, they own, Douyin is the parent company for TikTok, or ByteDance, and they know all, and now they have a social media platform that just trawls through behavioral data. So yes, it's a very scary time, but at the same time, there's nothing I can do about it as an individual. There's not even very much governments can do it. They threatened, I think last year or the year before, to ban TikTok from the Americas, but somehow that managed to stay above board and still, I mean, is very successful today.
Yeah, they made some type of modification, but I don't remember what the modification was, but I remember when they announced it, I was like, feels like we gave him pretty easy on that. And when people tell me that, they're like, they're collecting so much data on you. I'm like, our government knows everything about us. You carry a tracker around with you 24/7. So we sat next to a detective at a football game last week, and he was a homicide detective. And he was telling us that last year they solved, I think they had 81 murder cases, and they solved 80 of them because of cell phone tracking technology. I was like, oh, well.
I mean, fantastic that now works, but it just shows as well that we really are hooked to our phones.
We really are. And also, I like the Duke Professor book recommendation, but I am going to just throw out that you said the best class you took in college was at UNC.
Happily. I'm a bridge. I like to bring people together, so I'm good doing that.
Just have to keep the rivalry alive.
Keep it alive, just as long as Duke win next year, because it ain't happening this year.
No. I know, and it's Coach K's last year, which is
I
just,
know.
it's
It's
mind blowing to think that there's a UNC without Roy Williams and a Duke without Coach K, like that could exist, because in my entire, excuse me, memory, that has not been a thing.
yeah.
So
It's that you get some young hotshot upstart like me who decides that, yeah, okay, we're going to rock this house, we're going to shake things up. And well, hopefully for Duke it works out well, and for UNC it goes terribly wrong. But that's just one opinion.
I appreciate your opinion. I don't like it, but I appreciate it. How important would you say networking is? And if there was like a piece of advice you could give in networking, because I remember when I was in orientation for college, I actually kind of made fun of my like orientation leader because the one word he said nonstop was networking. And it's also the only thing that I think about now. Like it's my number one piece of advice for anybody trying to get into the sports world.
Yeah, it is very important, and America does it more than anyone else in the world. I mean, you guys are the friendliest nation when it comes to strangers. When it comes to compare it with the UK, if you said hey to somebody in the street, they'd give you a funny look and walk away pretty promptly. So you've got that going for you already. So make good use of it. The one thing I will caveat it with is make sure you know how to network. It's not just go out and do it. It's find some pointers, learn how to actually talk to a stranger, ask some interesting questions, and find out a little bit about them. Because, and you also have to be careful not to overdo it. I mean, I get, unfortunately, a lot of people who will drop me a line and say, hey, how you doing? I'd love to talk Formula One, which I'm always happy to do. The problem is you then get people who, unfortunately, again, it's just a mindset. They now think you're a best friend because you've given them the time of day and you're being courteous, but there are only so many minutes in an hour, only so many hours in a day. And if someone's eating up valuable minutes because they just want to check in, see how you're doing, and you're like, oh, hold on, what's the point here? Are you just talking to me, or are you asking for something? Have you got an idea? What's the step? What's happening? And if there's nothing happening, then you're kind of like, all right, I need to stop replying to these messages because they're coming in too hard. So that's again, not to deter anybody from networking. I just want to make sure that when you do it well, have a couple ideas and have some sort of framework of where do you want to go? What do you want to try out? Have something weird and wacky that you're passionate about that you can talk fluently with and talk to them about it. People love learning about other people's passions. And otherwise, it's like, well, I mean, you hear all the time, people love to learn. So teach them something. Don't just take something from them.
I think that's fair. I think a lot of people don't realize that networking should be viewed as highly transactional. And it doesn't mean that you always have to like give monetarily, or I think with transactional, we think a lot of that, but you need to bring something to the table as well. And if you can't, then yeah.
Yeah. It's a relationship. It's give and take.
So your new venture is called Social Steering. Do you want to tell us a little bit
Yes.
about that?
Sure, yeah. So I've basically taken what I've learned from Formula One over the past 4 years and try to apply that to other brands, athletes, sports. So we're currently in growth mode right now. So we're small, but we've just taken on a couple of PGA golfers, a couple of race teams, and a couple of brands in sport as well. And essentially, we're taking the approach that, look, if you want to do well on social media, go speak the language of social media and then insert your brand into that message or that language. So don't go, oh, we're a luxury brand and we're global and we only want to talk to the most expensive clients in the world, because the most expensive clients in the world, yes, they're on social media too, but they're only going to follow something that they actually care about or that they think is cool. And you've got to, everyone's human. Everyone likes something funny. Everyone likes something witty. Everyone likes something that offers insight or value. So that's where my company's kind of expertise comes in. They go, all right, how do we actually insert those pieces of language into a message that you say, all right, this is fantastic. This is who I want to follow. And then from there, that's the first step, is convert them into a paying client.
So do you like when individuals especially come to you, because obviously when race teams are coming to you, they already have some sort of branding, which obviously you can modify, grow, change. But when individuals come to you, do you take a lot more joy in growing their current branding or kind of redirecting and building their brand and image from the ground up?
Fair question. It's a bit of both. Depends how well I've been doing it previously. So the individuals that we've and group organizations we've been doing it with so far, it's in some cases been, look, let's chop and change this. You're doing way too much. Let's dial this back in. Let's go quality rather than quantity, because you've got some great bits in there, but it's lost underneath so much crap. So let's give people an expectation that when they see at your handle, you go, all right, I'm gonna stay around and watch this video. So I mean, I would say one of our clients, Ian Poulter, the PGA golfer. So the PGA recently had an announcement that said they were going to be rewarding their top athletes in a couple different categories. And social media was one of that. So it was a very big prize pool, with the top spot getting a one-off payment of 8 million. So again, a lot of incentive there to hit these benchmarks. And Ian was ranked at the beginning of the year with, I think he was ranked at maybe 20th or in the mid 20s. And since then, he's now ranked number 1 on the PGA in social media. And you think, all right, that's a very good step. That's now brings him a lot closer to that prize pot where he can actually get a good bit of cash from promoting himself properly on across those platforms. So, and I think my guess is that a lot of places going forward will have a lot more financial ties into, or commercializing their social media platforms, because it's where attention spans are. If you can convince somebody that you have, it's a good idea to get behind a platform because of what they're posting, then you're selling miracles in a bottle. I mean, now you see brands launching entirely on social media or entirely digitally. So, because they know that that's where the best return of investment is. And it's just a case of, all right, do it well and people will come.
That's such an interesting concept, because in baseball particularly, I feel like we are really, really bad about promoting players, bad about promoting the sport in general. I have a lot of complaints about that very actively. I actually compared Formula One's growth over the past couple of years and what MLB could learn from it. So it's really neat to be talking to you.
Yeah.
But I didn't even think about the fact that you could just incentivize players to do their own marketing to grow your brand. That's brilliant. Then you don't have to do it at the top.
Exactly. It does require investment. But again, we know that baseball does have the cash. Like, I think it's the most profitable sport in America.
Yeah, an $8 million investment. Maybe.
Maybe. Maybe we're talking a bit of crap there, but let's just go one of the most profitable sports in America.
It would not surprise me if it was the most profitable because of how many games that they play, but they also do have just absolutely wild salaries. And I do expect going forward, I think teams going forward will start to trend towards the point of putting a social media obligation into players' contracts, because it's really hard to make investments. Like, I love Mike Trout, greatest player of all time. I totally respect that he is a private person and he just does not want the glitz and glamour. And that's fine to have players like that. But it's also just borderline excruciating for the growth of the sport to have a player who is just the boy next door, right? Like you need that like villain. You need the Formula One needs the Max Verstappen Lewis Hamilton rivalry. That is great. It's very entertaining, right? You need the Daniel Ricciardos who just constantly create content because they're off the wall. Baseball is getting there. Like Shohei Ohtani is one of, and he kind of introduces that global market because he's the pool of all the Asian countries. But yeah, it's just excruciating to like sit here and look at how much you could be doing, how much players could grow themselves. There's one player in particular who has like kind of taken that initiative upon himself and he's currently suspended. So it's kind of sad to see something like, you see the idea, you see someone really trying to move it in that direction and then just get shot down.
Yeah, it makes sense. And essentially, as a business, what we're trying to do now is approach these organizations and say to them, look, stop going with one toe in. Here's how you do it properly. Here's the investment, and here's the return. So invest now, see the benefits in 3 years' time when everybody's going, oh, you've got to follow these guys. They're great. Or, oh, it's such a shame they've left this team because now they're not posting as great content. I don't see as much of them anymore. It's creating an affiliation with a brand. If you give them something good, they'll come back. It's like, if you've heard the saying, content is king.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there you go. It's, if people feel like they're getting some value from looking at your stuff, it's why you're doing a podcast. It's a platform that you then get to say, this is mine. This is my voice. You control it. People are listening in. They're scattered around the world. This is their general interest, but they keep coming back because it's not just about sport. It's not just about one little personal interest or lifestyle. It crosses all these different intersections. Someone goes at the end of the day, all right, I've learned something. And you know what? I was smiling while I was doing it. It wasn't painful. It wasn't a college lecture. It was, okay, I'll listen next week as well then. If it's like this, yeah, sure, I'll give it another go.
We're going to do some favorite rapid fire questions, but is your favorite idea that you've had so far the showing of 2022 car? Or do you have a different idea that you were like, that's my baby, so proud of that?
Oh God. I'm bad with my kids' names, so to extend that metaphor, I'm really bad actually about waving my own flag. It's something I've had to learn how to do a little bit better since leading Formula One. But there was that, or probably there was another video we put out on Facebook where we were, again, in advance of the 70th year of Formula One. I said, let's stitch together two videos, one on top, one on the bottom, showing the change in time, but the change between the two eras. So I got one video from the 60s or 70s, and one video from 2020 of the pit stop, and it was the world's fastest ever pit stop, and it was, 1.8 seconds to change all four tires. They both started at the exact same time, but of course the 20 car was gone, and we just left it on pause while the other one was still going, still changing. And you're like, oh my God, look how long it really takes, how far this sport has come. Anyway, that video ended up getting, God, I think that is some stupid number on Facebook, like 60 to 70 million or so.
Oh my gosh, that's really unique. That's interesting to think of too. It's a fun way to show the evolution of sport. We try to do something similar sometimes with pitchers in baseball, but it's just so difficult because the frame rates are so bad that you can't. Yeah. It's not like there's not a definite starting point where with a pit stop you do have the car stopping.
Yeah.
What is your favorite track in Formula One?
Track, easy, Monaco.
Monaco.
There's no who's fighting Elsa first. I mean, that place is an experience. And I was lucky enough, I got to stand on the Monaco hairpin during the Grand Prix. So, you're really, it's living at old school. It's being right up against the barriers with your, I didn't do it because this would have been too dangerous and it would have been inappropriate. But yeah, almost toes on the edge over the top of the track. And so that was a big moment for me. I thought, wow, this is kind of cool.
That's amazing. I love the history of Monaco. But I also like the idea of it being a 3-day qualifying and just fastest lap takes all. I know it would take the race out of it, but I don't know.
No, it's a bloody tough track to overtake at. And if you put a good lap in on Saturday, that's it. You're coming home with a bit of silverware.
I ask this question of everyone. It's my favorite question to ask any stranger, person, friend. Where's your favorite place in the whole entire world? Like if I could book a plane ticket right now and go to any place you recommended, where would you send me?
I'm going to be biased now. I'll say Switzerland. That's where I live. It's a place where you've got year-round happy people who are, again, have you ever heard of Bhutan as a country?
Yeah.
So they claim to be the happiest place in the world. They rank number 1 on the World Happiness Index. However, I've been there and it doesn't really seem like they're all super happy. It just sounds like they're very content. And absolutely great, big fan of that. If that's what rocks your boat, keep doing it. But Switzerland, you've got skiing, so snowboarding, whatever winter sport you want to throw out in as well. You've got incredible summer sports. You've got lakes, mountains, beautiful green grass. You've got wine and cheese, just from literally around the corner. And I've really never really been happier anywhere else in the world than in Switzerland.
All right. My last question for you is, what is your favorite bite in the world? Like if you could send anyone to have one food, one bite, that's all they can have is one bite at a restaurant. So it's not an entire collective meal, one bite.
God, I think, you should ask me this question before. It's like I could probably have a think. It's not something you log away in the back of your head. It would be, it would be my mum's home cooked roast, and you've got a bit of Yorkshire pudding, you had a roast chicken, a bit of gravy, and one bite, and it's just your memories come flooding back, and you think, oh, I'm warm inside. This is what I wanted.
I love that one. I love that you went family. A lot of people go with like very specific restaurants, but mine would be my Nona's pasta. So just like anything in my Nona's kitchen, honestly, but mostly like sit down and have her pasta. It's because it's mostly tied to like a really fond memory for me. So
nice. I like that.
Thank you for coming on. We so appreciate your time.
Oh, it was a pleasure chatting with you.
2 million to 17 million. Man, that's impressive.
Yeah, it's no small feat whatsoever. It was really interesting to hear Dylan talk about just like where he foresaw this going. I think he's like a true visionary. There are just people, another name I'll throw out there is Sahil Bloom. If you guys don't follow him on Twitter, you definitely should. There are people that just when you hear them talk, you're just like, oh, they get it. Their brain just functions on a different level.
Definitely. I mean, you can look at it in all aspects where whatever industry you're in, there's just something that just flows where, thinking about myself in general, there's subjects in school where I had to put in extra work or maybe spend some extra hours learning a certain concept that just was not easy. And then you had a certain classmates that just would get it without studying. But when you can apply that to a certain industry or to life or to a certain task at hand, the results can be pretty impressive as we've seen.
I think the other thing that's really interesting to me that makes a lot of sense that he said, and I mentioned that I want baseball to do this, that I incentivize your players to grow your game for you. The PGA is they're monetarily incentivizing their players to get on TikTok, to be active on Instagram, to use their social media channels to grow their own brand because it only benefits your own game. So just hearing him, like, that was one of those moments where I was just sitting there and I was like, that's just such a simple point. It's so simple. It's so simple. And yet it just makes so much sense. And then he is out here helping empower these players to do that. But yeah, like, we see so many athletes who are building their own brand and they're doing it for themselves. But as a league, that just makes so much sense. Like, you want to grow the game, the easiest way to do it is through your players, empower them to do it through their own social media channels.
Definitely. I think, we've talked about a lot how baseball is a few years behind, we'll say.
We're getting there, but slowly.
In that aspect. It was funny. I remember a game I used to play with my friends, like even last year, just be like, hey, name any random NBA player. And we, the eighth best player on the Bulls or something. And you'd look him up on Instagram and he'd have 100,000 followers. And then you would name a starting pick, like Lucas Giolito had less than 20K when he was an all-star. And it's just like, there's a disconnect there where, I remember certain players in the Kings that, the Kings are one of the worst teams in the league. And this guy wouldn't even get a ton of time for the Kings. And he would have triple, quadruple, 10 times the amount of followers as like all-stars in major leagues. And so I think, do you know who Robbie Rowe is? Robbie Rowland?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think he's a prime example of where he's an indie ball pitcher for those that don't know. And independent baseball is definitely not as big of an industry as Major League Baseball. But in training people that played against him and played with him, they said that there would be a good amount of fans that would show up to their indie ball games for Robbie Rowe specifically, with signs to say they follow him on social media. And it's just like, if he's getting a bigger fan base and a more loyal fan base than some of these Major League Baseball players, there's definitely a disconnect and something that they should tap into.
Yeah, and I know you and I have talked about this, that people want to feel an emotional connection. Like, think about like you and I when we talk about sports, like you want to feel this emotional connection to something, right? Like, I loved Derek Jeter growing up. I think that's the reason that I'm a lifelong baseball fan. I mean, I truly do. It might be Seinfeld. It could be Seinfeld. I did really love Seinfeld growing up, and George worked for the Yankees. But
George was a heck of a hitting coach. You saw that episode, right?
Oh, I've seen every episode of Seinfeld. Don't you worry.
Where he's hitting the home runs and teaching Jeter and Bernie Williams.
Yes.
That was great.
Yeah, I was a Yankees fan growing up when I was little. And, even now, like, I'm a fan of everyone and no one. I mean, I probably cheer for the Rays more than anyone, that. But it's just like you have this emotional connection, and that's why sports are so special. That's why families bond over teams. That's why dads take their kids to games, and then kids keep going to those games. And when you empower the players to create those emotional connections for you, you're only going to win. And it's way easier for individual personalities to try and win over people than a brand. Unless you're Wendy's Twitter, who has absolutely killed it.
Definitely. I think if you can, it's almost like a pay it forward, or almost like a legal pyramid scheme in the sense where it's like, if you have the Major League Baseball or just one entity trying to grow a brand versus like, hey, I have freaking 750 players that all have a fan base in themselves. And if they can market themselves, which we've seen some players do pretty successfully. Like I know Marcus Stroman's done a pretty good job of building his brand. And I don't know, I feel like most kids that are undersized that are playing baseball inspired to play in the big leagues, like he's their idol, right? He's a guy that's what, 5'7", 5'8", something like that.
Generous, but
Maybe 5'6".
I mean, even our guy pitching ninja, Rob, like what Rob's been able to do. Again, he just like has created this fan base that relates to him. They know that he's going to put out content that they like, and he's done a lot for growing the game. But you have to have a pulse on it, and it's hard for MLB to do that individually. So
yeah, quick shout out to Rob. Have you been following that best baseball Twitter account, March Madness style bracket at all?
Oh gosh, no.
The last update I saw yesterday was down to the final four, and Rob Pitching Ninja was still in it. So I hope he
All right,
wins.
everyone go vote for Rob. We'll link the tweet in these show notes, and we'll tweet about it too. But yeah, Rob's a good friend of the show and just A+ human. So we hope you guys have a Merry Christmas, a happy everything, whatever you celebrate, a happy Festivus. Gotta throw our Seinfeld references in there. But we have a lot of really exciting stuff coming up for you, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah, happy holidays, everyone.